Your Nels here for Boxing Daily. Thanks for joining us today. This is the third episode of the 13th round podcast, and I'm glad to be joined by Keelin McNamara. How's it going, Keelin?
Good man, how are you? Good to be back for number 3.
Absolutely good to be back. It's been a little while. There hasn't been a ton of boxing going on, but there's been lots of news breaking it, every day now. So we decided to jump back on the mic and speak about that and an upcoming fight camp card we've got in the UK. So first we'll start. A couple of weeks back, we had a unification fight between Brian Castano and Jamel Charlo. Somewhat controversial. It was a great fight, but it finished a draw. A lot of people thought Castano should have got it. What did you make of the fight and the decision?
Yeah, well, there's obviously two parts we have to talk about when we talk about this fight. We talk about how unbelievable of a fight it was to start with, a very strong fight of the year candidate. And then we have to talk about the judgment itself. For the first part, there's not a great deal that needs to be said. Absolutely incredible fight from both fighters. Brian Castano came out and he impressed me so much. We know how good he is already, but to have that height disadvantage, I think it's a good 4 or 5 inches against Jamel Charlo, and to still come out and do the work he did and to press the pace that he did, I think Castano went up a hell of a lot in many people's estimations. And I think he seriously worried Jamel Charlo. Now, to be fair to Charlo, he obviously got stunned. He came back into it very well, counterboxed quite well for the most part, and started to get into it more towards the end. But an amazing fight all around. There is no question about that. As for the judgment, I definitely think Castano won. How one judge had it for Charlo, I don't think I will ever understand. That was just absolute insanity. I mean, if you really wanted to push the envelope, you could have it as a draw, I guess. But there's no question in my mind personally that Brian Castano won that. He came out determined all fight, came out, pushed the pace, and landed some nasty shots in Jamel Charlo as well. So for me, Brian Castano definitely did enough to call himself undisputed champion.
Yeah, and I think I totally agree with what you said. I think he did enough. He should have got the decision. Obviously, we're so used to these now that to me it went a surprise when he didn't get the decision. Obviously, he's the B side. He hasn't got the second name Charlo, so it's not a surprise, but it is unfortunate. And the problem is someone actually looked at that fight and watched it and thought Charlo won by several rounds. I think it was 117, 111. What the judge
I
had
think
it
you're
in.
right.
So yeah, it's. I don't. We call it inept judges. We call it, this just bad judging. But at what point do you say that this happens so often, and it is often the A side who benefits? It's just pure rigged. It's gotta be because it happens so often. These judges repeatedly get another job. They don't face any punishment for doing these bad cards. Nothing really gets said. We're all angry for a day or two. Then it goes away, and that judge is back in another big fight, the next week. So for me, it all stinks, and I think something says it needs to be done because boxing does have a bad reputation for that type of thing, and they try to make it. It's 2021; it doesn't happen anymore. It's just bad judges. But for me, it's all very dodgy, and the one thing we do get out of this is we get another a rematch, hopefully. Castano, gets another a payday, probably a bigger payday next time round. So all his credit's gone up. It's just a shame he didn't get the W he deserved, but we don't want to linger on that too much because, as we said, it was a while ago, and I think the majority of people are over it now. But as I said, that's the problem. People get over these things pretty quickly, and we forget about them. And when we look back at history, those two drew, and no one will tell the proper story around it and what happened there. So yeah, little rant over, and we'll move on to some news and some good news. Finally, Joshua against Alexander Usyk. I'll say it again. Anthony Joshua against Alexander Usyk. Set for Wembley. I mean, not Wembley. Tottenham Hotspur Stadium in London for is it September? So yeah,
Mhm.
brilliant fight. What do you make of that one?
Yeah, I love it. For the first time in years, I think there's an actual mandatory who deserves to be a mandatory for the title. I think the WBO have done the absolute right thing here in promoting Usyk to be mandatory for Joshua's belt. Alexander Usyk is one of the greatest cruiserweights we've seen in at least the last decade, probably more than that. And he's made a very decent transition to heavyweight. He really has. I thought he would sort of drown a lot more than he has, but his first performance against Witherspoon and then against Derek Chisora, I was extremely impressed by him. In terms of the actual fight, even though I love Usyk and everybody knows how much I love Usyk, I have a feeling throwing him in against Joshua in his third heavyweight fight, I think it might be a stretch too far for Usyk, unfortunately, because it's one thing to fight a heavyweight that's relatively similar in stature, i.e., a Derek Chisora, but Joshua is a completely different fight. Joshua is a giant of a human being. He has a massive reach, a massive jab, and he punches like a steam train. Now, that is in no way me denigrating Alexander Usyk's chance in this fight because he's a world-class elite boxer and he will always have that chance. But I think in terms of a very early prediction, even, I think Joshua might stop him later on just because he has so many physical advantages in this fight that it can be one bridge too far for Usyk to cross. But either way, it is an absolutely massive fight. It's a hell of a fight too, and massive props to the WBO for making it happen.
Yeah, and style wise, I think Joshua is potentially the worst matchup out of the elite heavyweights for Usyk. I could see Usyk dancing around Deontay Wilder and making him look stupid, for 12 rounds pretty much. I could also see him, getting into a boxing match with Fury and potentially winning that one.
So could
And
I.
but Joshua, he is a perfect mix of both, where he has that boxing ability, but he also has that raw aggression and power. So I really do think this is a bad matchup for Usyk, and it depends what Joshua shows up, because I feel like if he maybe rolls back the clock a few fights and really goes for it, he can make a statement and take Usyk out early. But I feel like the Joshua we've seen as late, who's more content to stick behind his jab and take his time and do them things, might give Usyk a chance to build himself into the fight and potentially, cause an upset, because that's what it would be. He is an understars heavyweight. He was, as you said, very successful at cruiserweight, but personally, I don't think it's translated quite yet. I think Derek Chisora give him a fair bit of trouble in that fight, and I honestly don't think Anthony Josh would hear a peep out of Derek Chisora. I honestly don't think he would. So, yeah, but brilliant fight. But obviously Usyk with all his credentials, it's the best fight we can make right now. But obviously, we wanted the Fury fight, and things getting away, and we can be disappointed that we're going to see a trilogy between Fury and Wilder. But I don't think he can be disappointed on the Joshua side that if he's not fighting Wilder or Fury, he's fighting Usyk. For me, it's the next best thing, and it's a really great fight. And I'm glad, it'll be a packed stadium. Hopefully, if the UK can stay open long enough. And yeah, brilliant. Great to have Joshua back home in a big fight. I expect Usyk to come and bring it, but I think Joshua will be too much.
Yeah, I have to agree with you. I do. I think stylistically, everything you've said is absolutely true. I just think he's such a bad matchup for Usyk. Usyk's a really slick boxer and a very good counter puncher, and it's why he would do great against someone like Wilder. And I do think he would do good against someone like Fury. But Joshua is that perfect synergy of both boxing styles, which means he can turn to one and to the other. And if he came out with that sort of raw aggression that we saw against, I mean, I'm taking this back years now, but if we saw the sort of Charles Martin type aggression, then he could make the ultimate heavyweight statement. And I think that would be a really, really good thing to see because Joshua, over the last year or two, he genuinely seems to have got really, really irritated with Fury. And of course, we have our own opinions on that. But I think the fact that he's almost got so much pent up aggression from the Fury fights falling through, he could channel this into Usyk and he could use it to make a massive, massive statement if he wants to. And if he did, then that would be probably the biggest heavyweight statement in the last 5 or 6 years. So amazing, amazing fight. I would almost try and get over to myself if I can. Eddie Hearn, please give me a ticket. I know you watch this. But yeah, it's a great fight. And again, I have to praise the WBO because like you said, and I fully agree with you, the fight we've always wanted is Fury Joshua, but Usyk is at least an acceptable stand-in. I mean, it's not the fight that we would love, but it's a fight that we can at least get behind. So credit to the WBO for making it, and credit to both guys for stepping up to make it happen too.
Yeah, and the WO, just to touch on that, they did step aside and they were prepared to, allow Joshua the chance to make this huge fight. And obviously when it didn't happen, that's when, they stepped in and forced Usyk manager, which I've got no problem with. I think they've handled it well. And we've seen, bad handling of mandatory situations with the WBC. Dylan White's still knocking on that door.
Oh
I
God.
think he's suing them now or something like that. So there's a way to do business, and I think the WBO, obviously we don't love all these organizations, but on this occasion, I think they've handled it right. They've allowed Joshua's chance to make the fight. It was done, and then as soon as it went, Usyk pops in, and that's the fight. But yeah, great fight. I honestly think it is the best of the rest, best of what we can do, and Joshua continues to be in these big fights. I know he gets a lot of stick, but I think his resume is starting to speak to itself, and he's just another big name that I expect to be added to it. So we'll move on from that one. One fight, that's been ordered to another fight that's been ordered. Crawford against Porter. It's been discussions, but something seemed to have, fell apart, and now it's been ordered. So very glad to see that. What are you thinking on that one?
Oh man, I love this fight. I really do. These are the two biggest contrasts in styles in boxing, and I think it is going to make for an absolute firecracker of a fight down at 147, I believe it is. What a fight this is. Sean Porter is one of my favorite fighters, and I love him because he brings it every single time against every opponent that he faces. Is he the most technical fighter? I would probably argue he isn't, but he's a dog with a hell of a lot of heart, and he will happily stand and trade. He'll happily try and counterpunch, and every single one of his fights is a fight worth watching. And in terms Crawford, you have, in my opinion, the best 147 fighter on the planet. The guy who obviously holds the WBO strap right now. I mean, he is stupidly talented, and he is easily top 3 pound for pound in the world right now. He's just so gifted and so talented in the ring. And this fight is going to be fantastic. I couldn't really give a prediction for it yet because I just think that would take more time. But be under no illusion, it's one of my favorite fights that we're going to see this year so far. In fact, for me, it's equal to Pacquiao Spence Jr. that we're going to see. That's how much I'm looking forward to this fight. So once again, WBO, you're actually an organization that's saving the day for once. Thank you for making this fight because it's going to be epic.
Yeah, and the thing about Terence Crawford is when he originally, he captured all them belts, he moved up, and I think he picked up a good win over, was it Jeff Horn? And for me, at that point, there's a very genuine argument that you can make that he's the number one pound for pound fighter in the world. I think he's potentially is that, but as of late, his career has definitely stagnated, and he's been fighting the likes of Amir Khan and Kell Brook. And obviously, I'm English, they're our guys, but they would have been good fights, 5-6 years ago, not now. So I think he's still got a lot to prove. I think Canelo has took over. Canelo's running through the divisions, fighting everyone with a belt, and he's making things happen. And for whatever reason, Crawford's career has stagnated, and I do think it has a lot to do with Top Rank. They don't want to financially back him. They don't think he's a draw or these things. So it'll be interesting to see after this fight what happens with Crawford. I think his contract's up. I expect him to move on and see if someone can actually make him a star because, as I said, pound for pound, he's definitely top 5. For me, if he got the right fights, he could potentially be number 1. So looking forward to it. I'll make an early prediction. I expect it to go 12 rounds. I expect Crawford to dominate large parts, but also be in, moments of issues. But I expect them to make it look easier than Errol Spence did. I think Porter absolutely could have got that decision. It was a really close fight. So
I agree.
I expect Crawford to make it look slightly easier, but obviously it's never easy with Sean Porter, and it's a brilliant fight. It's a brilliant opponent, and I'm really glad again it's been ordered. and hopefully no one pulls out. But yeah, great fight, and another one, and we'll move on from that. And a fight that looked to be done. I've got it on my notes. Canelo Plant done, but apparently it's not now. Apparently it's
Oh,
talks have stalled. According to Caleb Plant, Canelo was making ridiculous demands in terms of if Caleb Plant withdrew from that fight in terms of sickness or injury, Canelo would get an immediate replacement opponent with the same pace. If Canelo withdrew, they would have to wait for him. So I understand what they're saying, but for me, throughout this build-up, I do believe Caleb Plant and his team have overplayed the hand. Let's be honest, he's not a bigger name than Carl Smith or Billy Joe Saunders. He doesn't have them type of credentials either. So the fact I feel like he's holding on to that like that last belt and he thinks it's a pair of aces, and it's really not that strong. Canelo can move up or down or move anywhere he wants and get the type of money they're promising him. The fact that he wants that belt, I'm sure they could wait and wait for someone else to pick it up from Caleb Plant and make that fight. So very interesting to see what happens next. I don't think this fight's dead in the water, but it's been a rocky build up, and I think at some point, we've seen Canelo's eagerness to fight lately. He even went to court with Oscar De La Hoya and the zone to separate from that contract just so he could fight. So at this point, does he move on? Does he look at Bivol and Berbatev? Yeah, so it's interesting times. What you make of it?
yeah, it's a very sticky situation because it's boxing politics once again rearing its head. I mean, I saw the accusations that Caleb Plant had posted. Obviously, you've seen them as well. And usually I would be on the side of someone like Caleb Plant. The problem is Canelo is the exception because in so many ways Canelo is keeping boxing relevant almost single-handedly in the mainstream right now. And the thing is, even if Canelo's demanding a $40 million purse, even if he does demand a rematch, if he lost that fight, the problem Caleb Plant is, and it's the point you mentioned, and it is the perfect point to make. Canelo is the A side. And not only is he the A side, he's the A star side. He is the biggest name in boxing right now, and he can go anywhere he wants and get any fight he wants. If he could make it to like 147, he could call out anyone he wanted. If he went up to heavyweight, he could call out anyone he wanted. When you bring that many eyes to boxing and you keep boxing going, you call your fights. And the fact that Caleb Plant has the IBF belt is the reason Canelo wants this fight. And it makes Caleb Plant, I'm sure, a life-changing amount of money. And I have to agree with what you've said. I think Caleb Plant and his team could have played this so much smarter, and instead they have completely overplayed their hand. The problem with Caleb Plant's camp is the only ace they have in their deck is that IBF belt. Beyond that, no one with respect knows or is really concerned about Caleb Plant. I promise you, Canelo isn't. Whereas Canelo has an entire royal flush in his deck. He's the biggest name in boxing. He's got 3 of the 4 168 belts. He's had a belt at 175. He could happily go back up there. He could go back down. It really doesn't matter to him. So realistically, this hurts Caleb Plant a lot more than Canelo. Obviously, being undisputed and being the king is everything to Canelo, but he can move on, wait for something to happen to that belt, and then he'll come back and fight for it with an opponent who's more easy to deal with. So I can sort of understand where Caleb Plant's coming from, but he has to be real as well, and he has to remember who he's dealing with. He's not dealing with Caleb Truex. He's dealing with the biggest name in the sport right now, and that changes things when it comes to negotiation. I mean, even though I was never a fan of him, we saw this time and time again with Floyd Mayweather. If you're accepted to fight Floyd and make the money that you make, you're subjected to the shots being called against you. And that's just a part of the package, unfortunately. So Caleb Plant, I think he has to reassess where he's at. And I think, like you said, I think he has to be much more realistic with where he's at right now, personally.
Yeah, the only thing I feel like they should really be demanding is a really good pace. Obviously, they do hold something. It is worth something. It's the last of the belts. So in terms of saying we want 10 million, I think that's a lot of money. But you know, if you can get 10 million, good on you. But besides that, I don't think anything else. Once you get that 10 million, I don't think you should really be asking for much more. If Canelo wants a rematch clause, of course he's getting a rematch clause. He's the man. And even if you beat him, who else are you going to fight and get that much money anyway? You're just not. So you're going to want that rematch clause. And obviously Caleb Plant, it would not get that rematch clause because if when Canelo does beat him, and it seems like on paper a pretty straightforward fight for him, why would you do that rematch clause? I think they're overplaying again. Even taking it, I know Canelo doesn't have true ties to the zone, but he's been fighting there. So I don't understand why the fight can't go over there either. I feel like they would happily put up the money. I think I just always feel like with this and throughout the negotiations that Plant side have been getting a little bit above the station, playing the hand on it. And for me, it's led to this. I obviously I get if that's true in terms of Canelo saying he wants a replacement opponent for the same amount of money, that obviously you can't do that. But is it true? And have we heard from the other side yet? I'm not sure. So, and the whole point of this fight is that Canelo wants that belt. It's not about the money. He wants that belt because he could get a lot of money elsewhere anyway. So, interesting times. It's going to be. I still expect this fight to get done because, as I said, it's Plant's only move. He's kind of got to bend a little bit to Canelo's wishes, and that's the problem we're at now. They aren't prepared to bend. They are standing tall, even though they really should just be, giving Canelo pretty much anything he wants to get this fight, to get this $10 million payday, because there won't be enough one.
Well, yeah, Caleb Plant's backed into a corner here in an alley because, like you said, he has nowhere else to go. He can't go down because he's beaten everybody else to get the IBF belt. And he can't exactly turn to Canelo at the negotiating table and say, oh, I'll fight Billy Joe Saunders. Oh, wait, Canelo has that belt. I can't go for the WBC belt. Oh, wait, Canelo has that as well. I can't go for the WBA belt because Canelo has that too. So this is literally the only fight that Caleb Plant can make. He can only go up, and the guy hovering above him is Canelo Alvarez. So I think Caleb Plant and his team, they're obviously very proud people, and I do respect that a lot. I think pride in that level is a very important thing, but they cannot let pride overshadow the judgment either. Like you've just said, like I've just said, you're dealing with the biggest name in the business here, and what he wants, he gets. But the interesting thing with Canelo is, even though he's calling his purse, and even though he deserves his purse, because like I've said, he is keeping boxing afloat right now, it's not about money for Canelo because Canelo is already set for life, with all of the fights that he's had and all the belts he's already won. At this point in his prime, he's doing what every prize fighter should do, and he's building his legacy. That IBF belt completes his legacy at super middleweight, and he's confirmed as one of the greatest super middleweights of all time if and when we think that fight does happen. So Caleb Plant has got to be much more appreciative of the position he's in. And even if Canelo does want a rematch clause, that's probably more money for you as well, Caleb. You probably earn $10 million on top of the $10 million you get for the first fight. So I would normally be on Caleb Plant's side, but I think he's got to be far more realistic. I'm fully on your side on that.
Yeah, and I feel like he thinks this is a really true unification fight, where you've got someone with two belts, someone with two, but literally Canelo's got all the belts and you've just got the one remaining one. So there is an unevenness in terms of ability and in terms of accomplishments in that division. So I feel like Caleb Plant's team should just count the lucky stars that Canelo's actually willing to come over to Fox pay-per-view, because for me that's a big win. That's a big win. So take that and run. But they seem to keep going and keep trying to push. And for me, it's like once you've got that and you've got the 10 million payday, back yourself to win the fight, then back yourself to win the rematch and make all this money and get all this acclaim and do all this stuff. But it doesn't sense like that from the negotiation sides. And I'm sure it's not Caleb himself, but his team, they're protecting their fighter, and they seem to be like trying to get as much as they can out of this one fight, because they know it's the only fight they're going to get with Canelo, because they expect their
Agreed.
fight to lose.
Absolutely, yeah. I think Caleb Plant's team are not stupid. In fact, I'm sure they're incredibly smart people. And I think they know this is a boxing mismatch. The problem I have with Caleb Plant is, and it's the phrase you've just used there that's perfect in this situation, back yourself. If you're going to hold a major title in boxing, you have to back yourself to be able to beat the best, or there's no point in being a champion at all. Canelo has spent his entire career backing himself. That's why he's wiped out everybody he's ever faced, apart from Floyd Mayweather and maybe Erislandy Yara early in his career. If Caleb Plant's not willing to back himself and he's not willing to make this fight, then I think this is the situation where the IBF almost need to step in as well, because they still have the authority to order the title to be defended. And I think if he keeps stalling and stalling, they should either strip him. I know that's the extreme option, but I think it's an option that needs to be retained if he's intentionally being obstinate and stubborn. I think they should either be willing to strip him as a last resort, or they should order that the titles be unified, because this is as good for boxing as it is for Canelo, as it is for Caleb Plant. And he has to see the bigger picture here. I really think he does.
Yeah, and just final word on it. That I agree with what you're saying. I expect the fight to get made because, as I said, it's the only option for Caleb Plant. It really is. He doesn't. Any other fight he takes right now is going to pay him 10 times less, probably even more, less than that as well, maybe even more. So maybe 11, 12 times less than what he's earning in this fight. So it's the only fight to make, and for that reason, I think it will get made. But Canelo is not going to hang around. He wants to be active, and I expect them to fight again this year, 100%. And I expect them, like with the zone and Eddie Hearn, they've got a good relationship. Dimitri Bivol is there. He is a fighter that Canelo has expressed and like a want to fight. So if these negotiations drag on for more than a few more weeks, a Bivol the fight will be announced in seconds. So yeah, I hope we see it get it done. It seems like it's just little things that are holding it up now, and hopefully we can get overcome them. But yeah, it's a messy one, and I'm sure Caleb Plant's team understand the position they're in. They're in a good position. Obviously, you can get paid and you can bring Canelo over to Fox. But besides that, you've just got to go with whatever he says, and I hope they do.
Yeah, you just have to. It's the unfortunate reality, but it is the reality. It just is what it is.
Absolutely, and we'll move on from that because we did have some fights this weekend, and it was a good heavyweight matchup between Joe Joyce and Carlos Takam. I think Joe Joyce cemented himself as the WBO #1 after Alexander Usyk. So yeah, he put on he got the finish. It was a controversial finish. Firstly, I just want to ask your opinion on Joe Joyce Takam, the actual fight, and Joyce's performance.
Uh, this is a bit of a difficult one for me because on the one hand, he got the finish, he got what he needed to do, and honestly, not a great deal more beyond that. I have to admit personally, and this might be a bit unpopular with people, but I was very unimpressed with Joe Joyce. I think when you have a 40-year-old fighter like Carlos Takam, who's been around the block at least 2 or 3 times, that's prime real estate to make a statement against a guy who's fought 4 heavyweight titles before. And I thought Joe Joyce just wasn't that great. I don't think he was anything to write home about. He wore a garden plant pot towards the ring, but that's not entirely the point, I suppose. I just thought he looked very dull, very flat-footed, and he got rocked 2 or 3 times by Takam, who is a basic fighter at best. So in the first 2, 3 rounds, Takam was getting tired, but he was hitting him. And towards the end of those rounds, you could make an argument that Takam won those rounds as well. He's landing some big shots, and Joyce was at least a little bit troubled by them. Admittedly, he got his job working a little bit better. He got the finish, which is, you could argue, is controversial, but he would have got it in the end. So that justifies at least stopping it for me. But in terms of was I impressed with Joe Joyce? No, I wasn't. And I don't think he's worthy of being a WBO mandatory for the main title after Usyk, because I think there's at least 3 or 4 levels between someone like Alexander Usyk and someone like Joe Joyce. The other problem I have with Joe Joyce is that he's 35 right now. So he's almost coming towards the end of what you would consider his prime years. And I just don't think he's anything close to a Joshua or a Fury. I think Joshua would put him out in the first 2 rounds, if I'm honest. So he got the win, and he deserves credit for that because Takam's a tough fighter, but I certainly wasn't blown away by it.
Yeah, there's a lot to like about Joe Joyce. He's a nice guy. He's an Olympic silver medalist. He's obviously coming into the pro game a bit late, so he is in a rush and things like that. But um, so yeah, he's got a lovely jab, and once it gets working, we've seen the damage it did to Daniel Dubois, and the same with Takam. It was lining him up towards the end of the fight, and he is in fun fights too because he's a really slow. There's no way to put it. He's a slow guy, and he gets hit a lot because of that. You know, he throws, really slow, gets tagged, and it makes a fun fight. And I think he'll beat a lot of guys, at Takam's level, Derek Chisora's and then type of fighters. But for me, when he steps up to the elite level, the amount he gets hit at heavyweight, it's not he's not going to be able to stand up. I don't think anyone can stand up to the amount of shots he takes. And as you said, Joshua would just wipe him out. He'd throw a slow shot. Joshua would duck under it or come over it, and he'd put him out pretty quickly. And Wilder and people like that. So, but that is the pool he's going to be swimming in 2022. I feel like Joyce is he's gonna step up, and he's gonna be in a big fight with someone, and it's gonna go badly because his chin is amazing, but to have it tested so many times at the low level he's been fighting at is worrying. It really is worrying how easy he is to hit, and I'm sure Josh is potentially licking his lips at that fight because it's all English. It'll be a huge stadium fight, and then this guy who is very very hittable it seems like easy work, but you can never write Joyce off because he's seen it so far. He's took everything. And he came back and he did the same against Takam. So as you said, it weren't impressive, but for me, it always seemed pretty inevitable what was going to happen because Joyce was able to eat his shots, walk forward, and eventually Takam tired. So good win, good name to get on the record. But like you said, he's 40. He probably should have made it look easier, and it does worry you moving forward. But all you can say is back to back, he's beat Daniel Dubois and Takam. So they are good wins. We can't take anything away from him. It's just a worry as he moves forward.
Yeah, it definitely is. I think Joyce beating Takam is the equivalent to Deontay Wilder beating Luis Ortiz almost. Now, I think Ortiz is a better fighter than Takam, but they both get clocked so easily that it is genuinely concerning. And I think if you look at the top 4, top 5 of heavyweights in the world right now, which I would consider to be Joshua, Fury, Dillian White, Andy Ruiz, and probably Deontay Wilder rounding that off, I think all 5 of them would smoke Joe Joyce, unfortunately. The problem is this is not an old school heavyweight division where you can be like a land ship from World War I and just take bullets and punches and punches and punches and eventually walk your opponent down. This is almost like a super cruiserweight heavyweight division style that we're in now. You have to be able to move your feet. You have to be able to hit and get out of the way and hit and get out of the way again. I think Joshua's straight rights would knock Joe Joyce out. I think Fury would just completely dance around Joe Joyce for as long as he wanted to. I think Dillian White would knock him out within 6 rounds. I think Andy Ruiz would knock him out as well. I think his body work would crumple Joe Joyce. And I think Wilder would still have a good puncher's chance against Joe Joyce. In fact, what Joe Joyce would be Wilder's dream fight because Wilder, as we've seen before, throws an incredibly messy jab to set up that wild overhand. It's not a clean jab like a Joshua or a Fury. It's almost like a sort of sloppy jab like that he throws into the guard and then comes round. The problem is Joe Joyce is not going to get out of the way in time to get out of the way of the overhand. So I think Wilder would beat him as well. And don't get me wrong, this is not me hating on Joe Joyce. I do like Joe Joyce. I think he's a really good guy. I think he's nice. I think he's marketable. and he seems very, very friendly, and he seems like a very good teammate to have in his gym. The problem is, I just don't think he's elite level, unfortunately.
Yeah, and obviously there's a time issue. Obviously, age isn't on his side, and he's got a rush, and that's probably why we're seeing some sloppy performances. But I do think against the main three heavyweights, he would struggle. He'd probably struggle badly. But I want to see him before he gets in there to be in with the likes of Dillian White. Dillian White's going to be waiting a while for any type of shot. We know that. So Dillian White against Joyce, I think that's a really good fight. Andy Ruiz, I think Andy Ruiz, despite he's not the biggest puncher, despite we all seen what he did to Joshua, but despite that, he's not a huge puncher. And then obviously Joseph Parker, I think they are the three fighters that kind of bridge that gap between Joshua, Fury, Wilder, and the rest of the division. And I think that's what
Parker's a good fight. I like that.
I love that one. I think Parker is probably the best of the rest actually on his day. So very interested to see what he does next. I really don't want to see him sit out and wait for a title. I know it's probably the smart thing to do in terms of payday and things like that, but I feel like Dillian White is financially a really great fight to make, and I think if they make that, it would be the perfect test for Joyce, because Dillian White is not unbeatable either. We've seen him hit, knocked out. Even by Perfeckin, who looked done really in that fight, didn't he? He looked well past it, and he still managed to knock Dillian White out. So for me, that makes more sense. That is more durable, and I hope that's what we see. But yeah, definitely excited to see what Juice does. I'm just a bit worried, about him stepping up to that elite level and how he'll be able to, handle it. But I'm sure he's confident, and I'm sure his team are confident. It's just watching him. He is, if you're a fan of him or a family member, they must be sitting at home, looking through their hands, because he's a tough watch even for me, and I'm not the biggest fan in the world, but the amount of punishments he takes is worrying. So I imagine his family hate it too. But yeah, good win overall, and we'll move on to some fights for this week. We've got Fight Camp Week 1. It's back to Eddie's back garden, and a good main event. Conor Benn, as I said, I think in our last show, he's got everything it takes to be the next big thing. I honestly, obviously, we've moved away from pay-per-view in the UK, but if you're talking about pay-per-view stars, I think he's got it all. He speaks well. He's got the name. He's got the fighting style. Does he have the talent to back it up? And as we're seeing lately, he might just have it. And he's got Granados, who's been in there with some tough guys. And it's all about Ben going out to make a statement in this one. Can he do it? I'm not sure. I think it might go a bit longer. It could go potentially to the decision, but ultimately, I expect them to win.
Yeah, same as that. I'm a big Conor Benn fan. Obviously, I was a huge fan of his dad, the Dark Destroyer Nigel Benn, and of course, his famous rivalry with Chris Eubank. I think Conor Benn can get it done. I think if he continues plying his trade, and I think if he tightens up his defense a little bit, I think he could be a real challenge at 147. And I think he could be Britain's answer to the dominance of the US at 147 as well. I think Adrian Granados is a good test. He's a tough fighter. He's got a pretty crisp jab and a pretty good hook as well. So Ben's obviously got to be careful. Obviously, the last time with Vargas, that was just a savage beatdown by Ben, and it really put a lot of people on notice for sure, which is obviously all to his credit. I think he can get it done. I think he can be the next star. I think, like I said, if he just tightens up a little bit of his fundamentals and he starts stepping up in level, he will start taking the notice of the big people, especially across the water, which is where I'm sure Ben wants to be. So I'm really looking forward to this. I will definitely be watching it, and I'm very, very keen to see how Conor Benn does.
Yeah, and if he wins this one, I think he has cracked it, because after this, I feel like someone like Amir Khan or Kell Brook there'll be a payday there for one of them, and one of them will be willing to fight Conor Benn, and then you've got a really big fight, a big payday, and a big name. So, I don't think there's a need to rush him, but I like him in with them, them veterans who are past it, but still, have talent and have ability. And if Conor Benn's not good enough, they'll find him out. So yeah, I think I expect him to win. I expect it to be a tough, gritty fight, but he'll emerge victorious. And overall, I'm glad to have these fight camps back. It's not the strongest card in the world, but it's nice having a bit of UK, shows back on, and seeing Anthony Yildirim come over for Jack Cullen. That's a very interesting fight. We've got Campbell Hatton on the card, Anthony Fowler, Lee Woods. There's a lot going on. It's obviously it's not a blockbuster event, but I do like these, and it's great to have boxing back, and I just hope we get more shows, less COVID pullouts. Let's get some momentum back in boxing, because it has been hard being a fan. We're talking 90% over 2021 has been talking politics rather than actually watching fights, and that's not what you want, is it? You should be the way around. So yeah, great fight to kick us off on Fight Camp, and we've got 3 weeks of this, so I'm sure we'll be back next week chatting more about that. That's me pretty much done, unless you've got anything to add, Keelan.
Yeah, I just want to say I really love the look of this weekend's fight camp. I think there's a lot of sleeper fights that a lot of people will miss out on. I think Sandy Ryan, Kirsty Bavington is a very good fight. I'm a huge Campbell Hatton fan. His dad, again, one of my favorite ever fighters, Ricky the Hitman Hatton. I think he's stepping up pretty nicely against Jacob Laskowski. I think that'll be a good test. Anthony Fowler, looking forward to that. Avery Yildirim and Jack Cullen, very good fight for Cullen. Obviously, Yildirim fought for the WBC belt against Canelo. That's what he's going to be known for now, unfortunately. And I think if Cullen can get past him, it's still an impressive scalp. One fight that I think is actually a sleeper almost that people should be watching is Tommy McCarthy and Chris Billum-Smith. That is a big all British cruiserweight fight that I'm really looking forward to seeing. I think both those guys are on a real run of momentum, and I think they're going to put on a barn burner of a fight as well. So all around, I think it's a very, very decent fight camp card. We've got a lot of guys who really could be pushing the next generation of exports out of Britain, and I'm just really looking forward to it. I really am.
Yeah, and especially that co-main event. You got the European, British, and Commonwealth title on the line. It is, whoever wins this, they've cracked it too. They're onto the next stage, and potentially the world stage. So yeah, brilliant card, and it is fun. I love having them back, and I know people, diss it. It's Eddie's back garden, but let's be honest, like it's a back garden capable of holding the big events, and I really do like this card, especially the main events. I like the way they're bringing Conor Benn along. I like the fact that they're putting him in with opponents we all know. Who was it last time? Sammy Vargas. We all know who Sammy Vargas is. I think he fought Amir Khan a while back. He's been in with some tough fighters, and Conor Benn made it look easy. Granados has been in there with a few good fighters too, and it's I like what they're doing with them. So yeah, fight camp this weekend. Can't wait to watch. We'll be back next week, probably about the same time, Tuesday, Wednesday, to speak about this card and the next one coming up, and all the news. I'm sure we'll have more from Canelo, Caleb Plant saga, and whatever else pops up. So thank you for your time. Thank you, Keelan, and yeah, speak to you next time.